Welcome everyone to Legends and Lectures again. Today we have back with us the ever wonderful, the ever lovely Dr. Dan McClellan. Dan, thank you again so much for being here. But you're here for a very special reason, and
Yes,
that is to shop your book. The Bible says so. So rather
that's
than
me.
Dan saying "'cause I said so," the Bible says so. What we get right and wrong about Scripture's most controversial issues. So Dan, would you tell us a little bit about the book, please?
Yeah, the book was really the brainchild of me, my editor, and the publisher, because I actually had another proposal that I was shopping around, and
Next book.
yeah, that's probably what the next book is going to be. But the St. Martin's got in touch with me, and they wanted to do a meeting, and they were like, really like this, but for your first trade book, you should probably do something that's a little closer to your platform that you have. And they were like, could you do like a greatest hits of your TikTok stuff? And I
Yeah.
was like, I could do something like that. And I decided I would frame this as the Bible says so, where I would talk about some of the issues that constantly are coming up about what the Bible is supposed to be saying about this, that, and the other. And so it's a collection of 18 different chapters. And then there's an additional chapter that's just kind of a 40,000 foot view at how scholars think the Bible came together. But I've got 18 chapters, and each chapter addresses a different claim about something the Bible says. So the Bible says the Bible is inspired. The Bible says God created the universe out of nothing. The Bible says homosexuality is an abomination. All of these kinds of things are addressed in there. And in each chapter, I basically, after I begin with a little anecdote, because evidently that's how you do things in this particular genre, tell a little anecdote that brings you into the topic of the chapter. I basically review what the data say, what the data are available regarding the given question, and then talk about whether the Bible does or does not say the thing, or in some cases it says multiple things. It says the thing and then it says not the thing, and
hmm
just go through and talk about what the data tell us about what the Bible is trying to say. But a big point that I'm trying to make in the book is that the Bible doesn't really say anything, that we have to generate what the Bible is saying ourselves. And in many instances, when we say the Bible says so, what we're really saying is because I say so.
hmm
And I want the Bible to be the authority that I get to leverage to validate and authorize what I say. And so I kind of close out the book in the conclusion talking about how we probably need to think a lot more critically about how we're using the Bible and why we are insisting it says what we want it to say.
Yeah, one thing that you're really big on in the book, I of course have read it, but is talking about your own personal dogmas, and it might not be dogmas like necessarily with regard to religion, but things like believing univocality is a big one. Everybody thinking that the Bible was written by only one person, and of course in the book, one of the very first things, as you said, that you do talk about is how the Bible came to be, and how
Mm-hmm.
many people maybe have written it, different time periods, at which point in the Bible. What do you think is the one of the oldest parts of the Bible?
I think probably the earliest layers of the Bible are little fragments of poetry that are actually embedded in larger poetic uh, groupings. So, like the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, maybe the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, Jacob's blessings in Genesis 49, things like that. A lot of scholars suggest have embedded within them very, very early poetic fragments, things that might go back to like 1000 BCE, maybe 1100 BCE. But then they're being worked into larger poetic groups. And so, and part of this is because we don't really have any historical narrative evidenced in alphabetic scripts until around the middle of the ninth century BCE. And this would suggest that if we find historical narrative in the Bible, that was something that was written down around the middle of the ninth century BCE at the very earliest. And so prior to that, the writing would have been poetic stuff. So interestingly, women play a prominent role in the in some of those earlier poetic fragments, with particularly
Yeah,
with Deborah.
isn't that interesting?
Isn't it
I
interesting?
wonder why they were removed. But this is not your first rodeo, though. This is not your first book. I mean, your first book is Yahweh's Divine Images, a cognitive
Mm-hmm.
approach, in
Mm-hmm.
open access, free for everybody, written by
Yep.
your alternate ego, Daniel O. McClellan. I wonder who he is. And like I said, I don't want to give away too much because obviously everybody's going to read the book. But yes, there's
Yeah.
other things that you do talk about in the book are this one is about God's wife, our good buddy Asherah,
Mm-hmm.
and contains many apologies to Law and Order, Young Frankenstein, Batman 427, and the Monster Squad, amongst many others.
Yes.
But I think that's what I think I loved about the book the most is that it infuses your sense of humor and how you approach things and make it more accessible for especially younger people. Maybe younger people won't know what Monster Squad is, but it's okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's definitely some Gen X stuff in there,
oh
and a
yeah.
couple even earlier things.
I heard you on yesterday. It came out for Biblical Time Machine, which is one of my other
Yeah.
favorite podcasts. And you were trying to talk about Dragnet, and they had no idea what Dragnet was.
I felt
For
so bad. Oh
For a
gosh,
moment,
about that.
I had wondered. I thought, wait a minute, I'm 41. I know what that is, and I'm considered to be young for that show. But you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, you saw it on Nick at Night, so you know what it was. But I think also there was a country thing there, maybe because Dr. Hellebond is not American, so maybe she doesn't know what Dragnet is. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also a few other things that you talk about in the book is how Satan is not in the Old Testament. He's not. We talk about child sacrifice, which is a
Hmm.
very interesting, important, and very uncomfortable subject that I think people should
Very
know.
controversial. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really important. I think people should know a little bit more about it. You talk a lot about slavery, also
Hmm.
very important. How there are many gods in the Bible. Yeah, as I learned when I was young, and how no one is going to burn in hell. So really important. But
All the
we love
classics.
all the greatest hits, as you said.
Yep.
But one of the reasons we love having you here is because we too favor data over dogma. So for those who don't know, I think you have to be under a rock at this point not to know what data over dogma is, especially if you listen to Dan's either his channel or you've listened to him on other podcasts. The last two episodes were Hey Jude, and today came out, I think, the Wandering in the Wilderness
Hmm.
came out. So for those who don't know, which I think is two people at this point, can you tell people about data over dogma?
Yeah, well, that's the name of our podcast, and I think that kind of had to be the name of our podcast, the Data Over Dogma podcast. But that's kind of a a motto of my channel, something that I came up with very early on, and I think probably the first like intro video I made on my channel. I said if I've got a theme or a motto here, it's data over dogma, and that is an aspirational thing where my goal is to try to prioritize the data over whatever dogmas are being prioritized by myself or by the folks with whom I'm interacting, and that can be theological dogmas, that can be dogmas related to things you've got to endorse in order to make the living you're trying to make, or things I may have published in the past, and I'm committed to them because that's got me where I am today, and so maybe I feel dogmatically committed to those things. There are a lot of different ways that dogma can influence how we're engaging these questions, and to the degree possible, which is not perfect, it's not a phenomenally high degree, but compared to how these debates usually go on social media, I think I do better than most. I try to prioritize the data over the dogma, even if that means, and it frequently does, I've got to contradict either the scholarship I have done or my own religious community's doctrines and dogmas and ideologies. And so I've tried to position myself not so much as someone who's batting for either team or any of the many different teams, but as someone who's trying to be an umpire and call balls and strikes when it comes to the academic study of the Bible and religion. And I'm not perfect at it. I'm always trying to improve, but and that's why I say that it's aspirational. Everybody has dogmas and biases. Many they know about, and many they don't know about. And so, like everybody else, hopefully, I'm trying to do my best.
Well, you have a book out, so if anybody thinks you're not doing your best, they're going to tell you about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they do
They already
anyway.
do, but
That
yeah.
they do anyway over to all the angry comments on the tickety talks and
Oh
everything.
gosh, yeah.
So speaking of
And the
mm,
YouTube is like every social media platform has its own kind of
mhm.
audience.
Yes.
Like I can frequently, if somebody just shared a comment, I could probably with pretty high degree of accuracy tell you what platform that comment was posted on.
Oh yeah. What are some greatest hits of some comments, the differences between TikTok, YouTube, and like Instagram, for example?
Instagram, I get an awful lot. Like Instagram is weird. That's where my audience is primarily made up of artists and celebrities and musicians and things like that. So I get a lot of interaction from like the performing and visual arts side of things, where it is a has a lot more to do with vibes and things like that. YouTube is there are a lot more, I don't want to say like
Tinfoil
new
hats.
atheists, but yeah, there are a lot of conspiracy theorists, a lot of I would say angry atheists on there who want to tear me down because they think I'm some kind of sleeper cell. I'm not
But
really
don't you
a
hate the
true
Bible, Dan?
believer. What's that?
Don't you hate the Bible, Dan?
Well,
I've
that's
seen so
those
many
are the comments
people.
I get on
That's,
TikTok.
yeah.
So on TikTok, it's you hate the Bible, you hate God, you're trying to destroy Christianity, you hate Christianity, and all that kind of stuff. So, but I've been surprised by how much pushback I get on YouTube from the folks that, according to TikTok, I'm there to placate.
Hmm.
Like they're all like, you're just a closet atheist trying to destroy Christianity. And then I
Yeah.
go on YouTube and it's like, you're not a real atheist, you're trying to defend Christianity or Mormonism or something like that. And there's a comment I make at the beginning of the book where I say I go back and forth between being amused by this and being disappointed
Yeah.
by this, and the same is true of all those comments, particularly the Mormonism one. It's like, you don't know anything about Mormonism if you think I'm an apologist for Mormonism. Like,
You've been
nothing at
very
all.
clear also in your videos. You've criticized Mormonism also.
Yeah,
So
yeah, frequently.
at that point you just go, you've not watched all my videos.
No.
Sorry.
Oh no. Oh no. And I frequently, people will be like, "Well, you just do this and you don't do the other thing." I was like, "No, I do this in this video, and then in literally hundreds of other videos, I do the other stuff. And you just didn't watch any of my other videos." And they're like, "Well, point me to the videos." No, you
No,
go
you
do it
go.
yourself. Yes, this is not my job to put together a syllabus so that you can know what's going on here.
I know,
It's
I feel your pain. It's the same thing where I frequently get accused of being a Christian. I've never been a Christian in my life just because we
yeah.
talk a lot about neo-paganism
Uh-huh.
and things. So for example, like Easter is coming, right? So you hear a lot about, oh, this is all pagan for Easter, and you just go, actually, literally none of it is, and that was all made up by the Victorians. And the minute you even suggest it, or the minute you say, nope, this was made up by Robert Graves in 1934, that
Yeah.
immediately, oh no, you're a closet Christian just trying
Right.
to go, okay. At that point
And
I just go, have a good day, sir.
yeah, there's at one there comes a point at which it is useless. It's just a waste of your time trying to
Yeah.
reason with people unless you're just kind of putting on display how these discussions can go. But yeah, and that's something I try to kind of put on display, kind of expose or reveal, is that a lot of times we just want to retreat to those identity politics and divide things up into teams and
Yeah.
say, you're saying something I don't agree with, you must be on the other team,
Hmm.
you're against me. And that's why the Christians will be like, you're an atheist, and then the atheists will be like, you're a Christian. It's because we tend to kind of, in our weaker moments, retreat to these simple binary battle lines. And so yeah, I can see that, particularly when it comes to something like Easter, where people have all kinds of idiotic conspiracy theories that they are just wholly committed to,
Oh yes. I mean, if
on
you
both
want,
sides.
we'll have you on again for December. We could talk about the historicity of the date of Christmas. That's going to be a fun one.
Oh golly, oh yeah.
Well, we
And
do have good questions for you, though. I promise no
okay.
conspiracy theory tinfoil hats. We have about 20 questions that I've saved actually on the last time that you were here. People were
Uh-huh.
very adamant about leaving questions, good questions,
Okay, awesome.
on that video. So we'll go through them. We'll try to get through as many as possible in the time that we have. So question the first. So some of them are multi-part questions. This one's a multi-part question.
Okay.
Why is Abraham considered to be the first Jew? I thought everyone before him was an Ivri, as it says in the text, until long after the Exodus. As well, did Abraham, the story of Abraham, originally come from Mesopotamia?
Uh Great question. Like I think if you talk to most scholars today, they're going to say you can't really call somebody a Jew or a Jewish person until probably like the second century BCE, probably at the earliest. Like before that, maybe you can talk about Judeans or Judahites.
Hmm.
But when we say, and I have always been uncomfortable personally with the word Jew. I usually say Jewish person, but that's usually something that we see at the intersection of regional, ethnic, as well as ideological frameworks. And that doesn't really come together until probably the Hasmonean period at the earliest. And so, in that sense, Abraham was not the first Jewish person. However, Abraham is usually identified as as the paterfamilias of the religions that descend from Abraham, and Judaism is the earliest of those, and then you've got Christianity and you've got Islam. But usually Abraham, you get the primeval history, Genesis 1 through 11, and then chapter 12 starts with Abraham. And so Abraham is kind of where the story really picks up for real, and he's the one from whom all of this other stuff descends. And so I think Jewish folks claim Abraham as one of their own, and I think there is within the tradition that is the again the paterfamilias of the whole
Yeah,
of the
Abraham
whole
Avinu is
line.
what he's called. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think you can identify Abraham with this later tradition, but I don't think you would call him the first Jewish person. Um, and if you really think that that's historically how things went, and it's not, but if you imagine that is the genealogy that goes back, Abraham, the religion, to the degree that you can call it a religion that he practiced, was totally unrelated to, not totally unrelated, but wildly unrelated to what Jewish folks follow. Things changed significantly. And regarding Abraham coming from Mesopotamia, like the story begins in Mesopotamia. And scholars today would probably say this is probably intended to kind of resonate with folks returning from Mesopotamia to the land of Israel. It's trying to give meaning and significance to their own experiences. So the story is being told in a way that reflects their return to this land that they are kind of foreigners within. And so I think that is probably a later framing of the story. I think the story itself probably originates in the Northern Kingdom, probably in the 8th, 7th centuries BCE, at least the kind of kernels, the original versions of the story. And it has been shaped and negotiated and added to and all that in the centuries between that time period and when it reached the shape that we find it today.
Yeah, it's definitely been edited. You like to talk about, not only in your book, but in general in a lot of your videos, we talk a lot about what he does to his son and whether or not he actually does what he does because two go up and one comes down.
Yep.
And where'd he go? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of and that's kind of the dogma part of it. A lot of people refuse to believe that that's the way it went, but it's like, hey, there's a lot of Jewish theologians throughout history who have said certainly seems like that's what's going on here, and like there are some peculiarities in the text.
The text does
um
say, give me your firstborn.
yeah. So and you can imagine that the text would have been reshaped and renegotiated so that it fit the ideologies of a people who abhorred child sacrifice later on, and so make
Hmm.
this a lesson about somebody who was willing to do it, but then get stopped at the last second. So yeah, it's the Akedah is such an interesting story, and the more you look into it, the more I think complex it gets, and the harder it gets to commit to a specific conclusion. But
Hmm.
a lot of people don't want to go through that trouble. They just want to say, "Well, no, what I believe is the right way to do it."
They want a happy ending. They want a nice story, but that's not
Yeah,
what
well,
happened. Uh,
not a lot of stories in the Hebrew Bible have happy endings, or
nope.
in the New Testament, to be honest.
Speaking of which, somebody would like to ask you about Judas. Judas is a late addition to the Gospels, he says. Why was Judas inserted? Was it to make a certain people responsible for Jesus's death?
Oh, because it comes from Judah, and so it's blaming the Jewish folks. I think if we only had like John, or maybe Matthew, Mark, and or maybe Matthew, Luke, and John, maybe you could say that. But the earliest Gospel, Mark, already has Judas in there. This is not a secondary addition to the Gospel of Mark. Now, whether or not Judas is historical, that's another story. I don't think we have enough data to say for sure. But in Mark, Judas is presented as kind of a tragic figure who just like the word that is frequently translated betray just means hand over. And
Mhm.
so the Gospel of Mark just could be representing Judas as somebody who maybe assumed that this was how this was the catalyst for this grand destruction of Rome. Maybe he thought he was just putting the pieces into play so that Jesus could finally have that confrontation and win. But like the idea of Judas as inspired by the devil, the idea of Judas as conspiring with the folks and being evil and all this kind of stuff, that all comes in the later Gospels. That's not in Mark. So there are some scholars who think that Judas has been turned into the villain in the later Gospels, and originally might have been somebody who was just trying to arrange the meeting so that you know, God could peel back the fabric of reality and come defeat the Romans. And then that's not what happened, and maybe he went, "Oh crap, I really effed up here." And so I don't know that it's an effort to try to blame the Jewish people. There are, but you know, I can see how that makes sense to folks. Paul already is turning the blame on the Jewish folks quite a bit. And so I think by the time of Mark, there's a degree of that going on, but Mark's not turning it up to 11 like John is. And yeah, I would say that the notion that the Jewish folks were responsible for Jesus's crucifixion, that's definitely a secondary addition. I think most likely historically what happened is Jesus had this confrontation in the temple, caused a bit of a riot, and was executed for his troubles. And it later gets turned into, you know, the Pilate episode where they say crucify him, and yeah,
I
that's
see what you
probably
did
all.
there with that pun. Very good. That was very good.
But that I didn't realize what was going on until it came out of my mouth, and I was like,
It's fine. We accept a good pun as long as it's funny. Next question. So, uh, what does it mean when the Bible says, "And Pharaoh's heart was hardened"? Did God do that? And if so, why? Also, why are there two pharaohs? Who is the one who dies at the end of Exodus chapter 2?
I don't think we can say who it was who died at the end of Exodus chapter 2 because it's not historical. And
No.
so they did not have a real Pharaoh in mind. Now, two Pharaohs because you have, um, I think you can't have this Pharaoh who was around when Moses was born still being uh, in place when Moses is like 80 or however old he is when he comes back, whether it was 80 or 40. But I'm sorry. First part of the question again
What
was,
does it mean when the Bible says that Pharaoh's
oh yeah,
heart
harden
was
his heart. Yeah.
hardened? Yeah.
So it says that his heart was hardened, and it says God hardened his heart. And I think very clearly the story is representing God as orchestrating this, as being a bit of a puppet master here, because God wants to show off their power. and that's kind of explicitly stated, so that everyone will know I am Adonai, so that all this these marvelous works will be put on display for the world to see, or at least to read about. So I think the idea is just to say, yeah, God is at the controls, and God is pulling the strings to ensure that this confrontation happens, that then allows God to show off their power. So yeah, the text quite explicitly blames God for Pharaoh not letting the people go in some of the instances. There are other instances where it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart, but there are very clearly and indisputably multiple cases where the text says God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
And the question that we
So,
asked, so obviously when we were learning about this when we were kids, was, wait a minute, if it says that God did that, why is he punishing Pharaoh then? If Pharaoh is just his instrument, and it's very clear in the text that he is just an instrument, his vehicle for quote unquote saving the people, then
mm.
why is Pharaoh punished? Why does Pharaoh lose everything? Why does he have his son killed? That's kind of not fair. He's just kind of hanging out there, not really doing much.
There's an awful lot that's not fair in in the way God deals with humans in different parts of the Bible. So,
Mm-mm.
and I think there would be an awful lot of people who would say, "Hey, God created humans without our consent,
Yep.
and then made it so it's impossible for us not to sin." And then is going to punish us for eternity for doing what God made it impossible for us not to do. Like, that doesn't sound very fair. So
I'm
awful lot
taking
that.
God to court for taxes. That's what I'm doing. I'm suing him for this.
And then God punishing the children for the iniquities of their fathers to the
Yeah,
the third and the fourth generation. But then at the same time, God doesn't punish the sons for the iniquities of the fathers. So yeah, a lot of inconsistencies regarding the fairness that God is willing to extend to humanity.
that's why when you have anybody who says, "Oh, the Bible doesn't contradict itself," you immediately go, "Okay." Within
I
within
still, I still,
the same sentence, you will have a contradiction.
yeah, it still baffles me that people try to perform that conviction about the Bible not having contradictions. And somebody even said they were like, and this isn't me beginning from this conclusion. This is me arriving at this conclusion after years of study. It's like, no, no, it's not. Like
In your
you,
book, you have a wonderful chapter called God, I think it's God is a liar. And
oh yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. And so one of the things, like whenever people say like, "Oh, it doesn't contradict itself," just open Genesis where it says,
yeah.
"If you eat from the fruit of this tree, you will surely die." And then they eat the tree, and God goes, "Lol, just kidding."
Yeah,
Okay.
that, oh man, that's the that's one of the ones where people are like, no, no, what you got to do is it's really talking about in 1,000 years from now, or or you will become aware that you are now mortal, and that's what it really means when it says that. And every time I make a video about that, folks are like, it means spiritual death. And I'm like, no, the paronomastic infinitive use of the verbal root mot occurs 56 times in the Hebrew Bible, most of the time in the in a passive stem, but a minority of the time in the active stem. And in every last occurrence, it is referring to literal biological death. So you have no case to make.
Mavet
This
is
means
Mavet. That's it. Speaking of Genesis, so who created the earth, darkness, and waters in Genesis if God did not make them?
they were just always there, and uh, that was not a question that had been asked prior to that. That's just a lot of people think that every statement that is in the Bible has, by the time it was written, it had to have been fully interrogated from every side, and so it knows all the questions and all the answers are already embedded in it. And the simple fact is that these were stories that were told before those questions were asked. And so yeah, it's there are a lot of different things that are going on right now in our society that no one had ever dreamed of when the Bible was being written. And it's like, you can't ask questions about about the Denver Broncos of the authors of the biblical text, because they didn't exist at the time. And
Ask
So
me
yeah,
about
nobody
electricity,
invented it.
Dan. Ask me about
And
Eruves.
yeah, this was just the conventional wisdom was that this stuff existed. And it wasn't until the late second century CE that Christians were finally like, you know what if, how about we say God invented it all out of nothing? And then, the Greco-Roman world is like, what do you mean? You can, what? You can't, what? And, and they were like, yeah, that's going to work.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Ship it.
yeah.
Next question. Why is Svardea singular? Was it one giant frog? And I was the I,
Oh,
we talked about this a lot when I was a kid, but I loved the idea of it just being a giant frog that leapt out of the Nile and going ribbit, and then suddenly it just explodes with like baby frogs. But I know that's not how the language works.
yeah, you can see a lot of this when it comes to talking about animals. They'll talk about the horse or they'll talk about the bird, and it's all singular, but they really mean all, lots and lots of them. And so I think it's just a specific style where it's a collective singular referring to um, the frog as thousands and thousands and thousands of frogs rather than one giant kaiju frog
Oh
that
no,
slowly emerges from the Nile River. And
you crush my dreams of Godzilla versus Froggo. That'd be amazing. Yeah, I know that's just not how the language works. But still, in my brain, I still think it's just one giant river frog. Boom, boom, like comes out of the Nile.
you can imagine them looking at their little cups and the
Yes,
the
yes.
the ripples of water as you go goof, goof.
That's only number two. Wait till the rest of the play. Um, so I'll have to read this next question with a Seinfeld voice. What's the deal with shetnas, or clothing that contains linen and wool?
Right, yeah,
Where did the word come from if it's not ancient Hebrew? In modern Hebrew, it means like a mixture.
right.
Why was this law made, and why does no one ever mention it now? I think it was Rashi who talked about how it was a Knani or a Canaanite custom but I don't think we know that. I don't think there's any archaeological evidence for that.
No, the I think the argument a lot of scholars today would say it seems to be a borrowing from Egyptian, in which
Um,
case maybe it's like those dirty Egyptians do that, and so that's why we don't do it. But when you look at and it's a weird regulation, but when you look at other parts of Exodus, it actually prescribes the mixing of linen and wool for like the sash that the priest wears
mhm.
and all this kind of stuff, which is why Josephus was like, wait a minute, it says you have to do it here, and then it says you can't do it there. And his idea was that it was exclusively for the priests to mix those two fabrics. And so it was prohibited for non priestly classes. But yeah, this is another example of how not univocal the text is, because whoever wrote the Shetna's proscription was probably not aware of instructions elsewhere in Exodus about how the priests were supposed to make an ephod of mixing the two different types of fabrics. So it's just another indication that this is the bringing together of a lot of originally disparate, independent ideologies and prescriptions and proscriptions. But yeah, it could be a borrowing from Egyptian, and it could have been, yeah, those dirty Egyptians do that. We don't do that, at least for whoever wrote the proscription. But yeah, and then it takes on a life of its own once it gets down into Jewish practice, and you get the all of the halakhic
Yeah.
literature and everything. It becomes its own tradition.
No one does this anymore. Just to be clear, just in case people for some reason think, oh, did you still keep? No, nobody does this anymore. Instead,
and
it's like grafting. Like we just give it up. It doesn't matter anymore.
and it has nothing to do with the vibrational frequencies of fabrics, which is sometimes brought up where they're like, yeah, what is there's somebody who was supposed to have done like a study and found that like the wool and the linen both have frequencies of 5,000 frequency units or something. And and they cancel each other out if you put them next to each other, which results in a frequency of 0, which causes cancer, evidently. So yeah, none of that is, that's all just laughably made up stuff.
Hear that one. That one's so good. I thought you were gonna like say something stupid about like the gematria of the two words, like matches or something. But that is a special one. Wow,
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah.
amazing. Oh, okay. Oof, that hurt. So, next question. What is the kingdom of heaven? Is it all just based on bro, trust me, or is it just vibes?
I think the idea, so I think within the gospels we're actually seeing a renegotiated concept, because I imagine that the historical Jesus probably did talk about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, but spoke of it as something that would take place and exist here on earth. Like, we're going to turn this into a Shangri-La, we're going to turn this into a utopia. And when Jesus got crucified and all his followers went, oh crap, what do we do now? And came up with the idea that, oh, the Jesus actually did win over, but it was a spiritual victory over death and over sin. And so then they have to renegotiate everything. And I think over the course of generations, the kingdom of God went from being something that would be established on earth to something that would be more um, cloudy and harpy
And vibes.
and vibes. Yeah. So so there's, I think there's a case to make that they thought that would be something temporal, something that would happen on earth, and probably that it would correspond to a renewal of the earth. Like, they probably did think there was this eschatological renewal that was going to take place, but not something, far off in a distant galaxy, but something that would just happen here where everything would be different, and that's the sound it would make.
Last time when you were here, we talked about letting go of the rapture. You just went, no, I want to keep the rapture. I imagine like the two sounds together between like the kingdom of heaven and the people going, no, I want the rapture, fighting each other. Okay, so th this question is a long question. This is about Melchizedek. I
Oh,
don't know the English. It's Melchizedek, I guess.
Melchizedek
Okay.
is what they,
Okay.
yeah. No, they don't go so far as to say Melchizedek,
Okay. Just
but
just
that would be
checking.
funny if they did. Now, and I used to wait tables at a few different Mexican restaurants where we would have folks in Dallas come in and ask for the cheese quesadillas. But
Oh,
I still have not heard Melchizedek.
no, sir, you don't get to eat here. Leave. Is there biblical support for Jesus being the only a high priest after the order of Melchizedek? How is Melchizedek a priest, and how did he teach Abraham the Bible before the Torah and the priesthood were even in being? Are Melchizedek and Melchishera the same person? Is he also Mastema from Jubilees?
Melchizedek is a that's a Hellenistic period kind of spin on Melchizedek. You want my king is righteousness or king of righteousness. Well, we're going to give you the king of wickedness and all that kind of stuff. So no, the Melchizedek is not the same as the other things. Melchizedek, when we look in Genesis 14, seems to be presented as the king of Sodom, and this is what confuses a lot of people. But if you read that story, it's like Abraham went out to get the stuff, and he comes back, and it says the king of Sodom went out to meet him, and then Melchizedek offered to do the stuff, and then Abraham responded to the king of Sodom, and like the identities of Melchizedek and the king of Sodom seem to be a little mixed up here. And Melchizedek is supposed to be the king of Salem, which is very close to Sodom. And so Bob Cargill has a wonderful book on why Melchizedek probably was originally the king of Sodom. But then the later editors who are like, things are about to go bad for Sodom because of how evil they are. So maybe we not have this guy be the one that Abraham was like, oh yeah, we're not worthy to. And so, but the idea that there's some kind of connection between that story and the New Testament and Jesus and all this is just a later renegotiation. Like, you have this enigmatic figure who for whatever reason is cooler than Abraham, and he just there once, and then you see him in a single psalm talking about the order of Melchizedek. And so, you expand on things, and you get your fan fiction going on that is about all this, and you try to have these loose ends tied off, and you try to connect these dots, and the next thing you know, some people have argued that Melchizedek is Shem. Some people have argued that Melchizedek is the premortal Jesus, particularly if you want to try to create some consistent theory of priesthood authority going all the way from Genesis down to the book of Hebrews and the book of Revelation. So it's just all later renegotiations of what's going on. But what I think is actually happening here is Abraham runs off to recover all the stuff that has been taken by these weirdos from the king, and he comes back, and it says he gave him a tenth of everything, which people think he's like, oh, you're my ecclesiastical leader, so I'm paying you a tithe. And I think the idea is really Abraham saying, hey, I went and I got your stuff back. I'll give you a tenth of it. As a way of saying, here's some of your stuff back. I'm keeping the majority of it. I think that's probably what's going on. He's just a warlord, just saying that I have finders keepers, and I'll give you a little bit of what's going on here. And so, yeah, I think we have reread the story significantly and many times in a cumulative way. We keep rereading the rereadings of what was going on, but the original story was probably a lot less cool for people who want the Bible to be inspired.
Yeah, that's a big one that especially though you have whole chapters devoted to the Bible being inspired in your book. And the next question, what do scholars think Psalm 110 is talking about if it's not about Jesus, as some have claimed?
Well, I think I'm going to have to pull it up because I don't remember what is occurring in what verse precisely, but this is probably a messianic psalm. But the ideas about the Messiah in that time period were much different than what was, the ideas that you had by the time of the New Testament.
Yeah, Jesus was
So
not even a wink in the eye at that
yeah,
point.
no, not not a twinkle in anybody's eye yet. And like when you look at the whole psalm as a whole, this is about someone who's going to have political power. It's about a warrior. This is probably a Davidic king that is supposed to restore some of the previous glory of the kingdom of Israel. He will execute judgment among the nations, filling them with corpses. He will shatter heads over the wide earth. He will drink from the stream by the path. Therefore, he will lift up his head. Like this isn't Jesus. This is probably a Davidic king who is, this is what they were hoping for in the time period that Psalm 110 was written, probably the Persian or Hellenistic period. So certainly messianic, but not about Jesus.
Was David even real? Was David real,
I
David?
think there probably was a historical David, but yeah, it's certainly not what we read in the text. I mean, we've already seen that whoever's writing about David is snaking stories from Elchanan and stuff like
Hmm.
that, saying, "Yoink, this is David's victory now." And they're Jacob Wright wrote a wonderful book about historical David, and then yeah, I think I have both of these books on the historical. Yeah, there they are. And then Joel Baden has another one on the historical David. There are a lot of scholars who would say no, it's completely fabricated, but we have an inscription that refers to the house of David as kind of a dynastic group, which is suggestive, I think, of the existence of a dynasty rooted in somebody named David. So I think probably historical, but like Jesus, it's nothing like the fanfic that has come down to us.
Fanfic is always better. So speaking of historical things, if Song of Songs was not written by a historical Solomon to Sheba, who did write it and what were they talking about?
It's erotic poetry. That was a popular genre of the time period. And so somebody was just like, well, I'm gonna give this a shot as well. And I think it became, however it became associated with Solomon, that association ensured that it would get circulated. And I think people were like, what to do with this? And, you know, it became an allegory for God's erotic love for God's
The
people.
nation. I
Yeah.
certainly would not want God
Yeah,
in that.
that is not enthusiastic consent on the part of the entire nation.
No, but as you
Uh,
talk about in your book, the idea of sexual consent in general in the Bible is very different from our idea of the Bible is not very much about two willing participants.
no, 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 no. Yeah, that's a big thing that I think a lot of people miss, and it is very disturbing that there are an awful lot of Christian nationalists these days who think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
People who will argue that there's no such thing as marital rape, which is yeah, that like that is true of the Bible, but please let's leave all that stuff in the past.
Yeah, keep that in the Bronze Age. That's
Yeah.
good. So speaking of our friend King David, why is King David called a man after God's own heart if he is so problematic? And I would argue that both of them are problematic, to be honest with you.
Well, I think the it's kind of like the, you know, when you look at sitcoms, uh all kinds of crazy stuff. Like you watch The Simpsons, an episode can end with all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I watched the episode where the George Bush moves in across the street, and then it's a Dennis the Menace homage, and then at the end the Bushes move away, and then Gerald Ford moves in, and it's like you never hear about Gerald Ford ever again. Once the episode is over, everything
Mm,
resets.
yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same with some of these vignettes that we have with and particularly with the kings, because you had the same thing at the beginning of Saul's reign. It was not that Saul already had was already a man after his own heart, but what happens when Saul becomes king? Samuel says the Lord's Spirit is going to force entry into you and turn you into a different person. And then a couple verses later, it says the Lord's Spirit did that and gave Saul a new heart. And in this time period, the heart was constitutive or constitutive for the people who get upset with the way I pronounce things, of the person. So your heart was kind of the seat of it was your emotional as well as your cognitive center. They couldn't have cared less about the brain in ancient Israel. It was all about your heart. And so Saul is given a new heart in order to be a righteous king, and then everything goes sideways. And then we start back over with David. Guess what? David's heart is already in the right place, and then everything goes sideways. And it's because these stories are all being written well after the fact, and they're looking back on things, and they're not going to tell a story like, and then there was this other guy that everybody knew was going to f everything up. No, they want it to be a declension narrative. They want the drama, and they want the righteous person to fall. And so they have, David, who's another warlord, basically a
Yeah.
mercenary
Hmm.
who probably like invaded and took over Jerusalem. That's probably what historically happened. Couldn't do it in the northern kingdom, comes down to Jerusalem, manages to take it over, and then has all these fake stories written about him. And so it's just the storytelling. And it happens with everybody. It happens with Solomon after David. So I think it's just the way they're telling the stories back then.
Hashtag David was gay. I'll never
Yeah, I
let
still
that one go. I would just won't. That's my personal dogma. Is
yeah.
hashtag David was. Come on, who loved me more bravely than you, whether husbands or wives? Hashtag David was gay.
And a lot of people, like, I personally am on the fence. I don't know. I
No,
think
I don't.
both.
Historically, we don't know. There's no
Yeah,
point.
I think both conclusions are probably equally plausible, and a lot of people just pull out the fainting couches about that notion. But it's like the only time anybody's really upset about that is Leviticus, the holiness code, which is pretty late compared to all the other texts. And, David committed adultery. Nobody
Hmm.
cared.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's not a good dude.
yeah, I mean, the prophet Nathan was, you know, the comparison is to a dude who owns a lamb, and he's like, and you killed him, and it's like, well, he should have been put to death because of the adultery part, but when you're the king, nobody cares. Just
No.
like the president today can authorize somebody's death, and it's kind of like, well, he's the president, he gets to do that kind of stuff. Like, so David can do what David wants to do, and if that includes other dudes, then I don't think anybody in that time period was going to have too much of a problem with it.
David runs by rich people rules. He's a king. That's how it is. Yeah, they don't
It's
pay
good to be
taxes.
the king, as the
Yeah.
great poet once said.
Yes, exactly. So many of those you sprinkle throughout your book, which I love. I love how you for everybody who doesn't know, you just very carefully put like apologies to Pearl Jam or apologies to whoever it is on the
Yeah,
bottom.
although I gotta see, like, I only have the advanced readers edition. Like, this is the first proof. Like, there are a bunch of corrections that have been made to this. And there was the chapter on abortion. I have a section called "More Human Than Human,"
Hmm.
with apologies to, and I think I said Rob Zombie, but like technically the band was White Zombie
Yeah,
that did the song, and I don't remember if I corrected that or not, because
we'll
like it's
find
not
out.
totally incorrect, but yeah, I'm supposed to be getting the actual final hardcovers this week, so
I hope
I'm looking forward to
so.
that.
We'll see what happens with the tariffs. Oh God.
Well, I don't think they're coming from Canada, so
No.
but yeah, they told me they were ready to go. They just needed to verify the shipping address, and they were going to get them out to me. So hopefully it's
I hope
soon.
you do get them very soon. Let me know. Let me know what they actually send a picture. Let me know what they look like and how
Yeah,
many.
yeah. And
Okay,
I'm what's that?
count up all your apologies at at the bottom and make sure they're well edited.
I got, what was so funny is with the first proof, there were a bunch of comments where some the editor would be like, so you did this song and you said this person, but this is actually also recorded by this other person. Do you want to include them in it as well? And so I was like, sure,
Yeah, just
whatever.
get all the apologies in. I mean, you
Get
have
them all.
an
Yeah.
apology on almost every 3 pages. There's an apology,
I
so
should
just throw them all in.
I should have done that, and then in the apology said all apologies asterisk with apologies to
Oh,
Nirvana.
that's a good one. That's a really good one. Oh, no,
Yeah.
I'm just it's okay. Second edition. Second edition. It's good.
So I've got, what? There are a bunch of questions that as soon as I submitted the manuscript, like it was supposed to be 85,000 words. It ended up being like 91. So
Hmm.
I went over, but there were a lot of questions that I couldn't get in here. And like in the 2 or 3 weeks after I submitted the manuscript, I made a list of another 20 so that I could do a volume two if the publisher lets me.
They
So
will. Don't worry. They will, because there are so many questions that I'm sure people want to. And you know what though? People don't read anyway. You know this from people who don't read the Bible. So, so I'm sure they'll be glad to do another one. Actually, I'm really looking forward to the audiobook version. I hope you're going to read it.
I did. I recorded the narration, and so that will come out on the 29th with the hardcovers. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
Do you read the
And
apologies too?
no, I should have though, because that was
No.
something with the director. He was like, "Do you want to read the asterisks?" And I was like, "I think it would be really fun and really funny, but why don't we do it without it to see if it's okay?" And I completely forgot after that. But yeah,
No.
and then like the second half of the book, every time I come up to one, like one of the sections is, "This is going to hurt you a lot more than it does me,"
Yeah.
which is a line that I recall from being 10 years old and reading Batman number 427, where the Joker beats Robin to death with a crowbar.
Yep.
And like I remember that line stuck out to me from when I was 10. And so I have down at the bottom, with apologies to the creators of Batman number 427. But like once I got to the second half of the book, I was like, I should have done it. It's too late now. They're not going to let me go back and record the first 10 chapters all
Second
over again.
edition. Second edition.
Yeah, but I thought That's Let's Talk About Sex Baby with
Mm-hmm.
apologies to Salt and
Salt and
Pepper.
pepper. Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember I used to hear that song on the school bus on the way to Grosvenor Elementary School in Washington D.C. And I would hear this.
It's a
This
very
was the
catchy
Wild
tune.
West. We There was that. And then we would hear Trojan Man commercials on the bus as well. I don't
Trojan
know if
man.
you recall any of that, but
Yep.
I was in elementary school, and it's like Trojan Man,
Hmm.
and then they would have some goofy little narrative, and I was like, why are we hearing this on a school bus?
It was on the
But
radio back then. That was the 80s. There was
and
no
then what was
internet for.
there was the Humpty Dance. I think there was
Yes.
another song, um, the butt.
Oh, is it
Ready?
Sir Mix-a-Lot? That one? I like big butts.
No, Experience Unlimited. We used to hear that one, and that was from like the '80s. But we used to hear that one on the a lot too. So, yeah, I'll hopefully the second edition I'll get to do some of that.
Well,
And I don't know
I
where we have gone far afield of
we were going to talk about Jezebel, but it doesn't matter.
Oh,
This is
there we
this
go.
this is your show, Dan. You can talk about whatever you want. The next question is, why is Jezebel a bad name if it's the same as Isabel? What's Jezebel's connection to Baal? Was her coronation responsible for a rift between Israel and Judah or between Baal and Adonai?
Again, storytelling. Jezebel is represented as the queen who worships Asherah and facilitates the worship of Baal and all of this kind of stuff. So and that's tied up with what's going on between Adonai and the followers. And when you look in Hosea, you get you will not call me Ish, no, you will not call me Bali anymore, which would mean my husband or master, and you'll just call me Ishi, which means my husband or my man. Um, yeah, I think it's just because of tradition, because she's supposed to be the pinnacle of that kind of wickedness, and she's a woman, and she's like one of the only real examples of a wicked woman that I can think of in the Hebrew Bible, uh, and certainly the one who exercised the most power.
There are some who do questionable things, but
There's some who
none.
do questionable things, but sometimes kind of heroically. um, yeah,
But
I'm
like
thinking
evil,
of like,
evil? Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
like she's represented as the main baddie, and so when you get down to like Revelation, it's like the spirit of Jezebel, and it's either what is Revelation condemns, like Balaam and Jezebel are the names of the male and the female counterparts for the bad influences that are within Christianity, that some folks argue may be a reference to Paul. Have you heard that one?
No, that's new to me. How is that possible though?
so so Balaam and Jezebel in Revelation are supposed to be these wicked influences among the followers of Jesus, where they're endorsing sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed to idols. And I think it is Elaine Pagels makes the case, and it's there are other scholars who have argued this too, but I think I heard it with Elaine Pagels in her book Revelations, where she mentions that Paul, like, sexual immorality was a was the accusation that was leveled at people who were unequally yoked, followers of Jesus who married non-believers.
Hmm.
But Paul was like, yeah, it's okay, because maybe you'll convert them or whatever. And then when it comes to not eating food sacrificed to idols, in the book of Acts, that's like one of the four things. It's like, okay, we got Christianity now, Gentiles can have it. All of the law of Moses is out the window except for four things. And not eating food sacrificed to idols was one of them. But Paul is like, meh, an idol is nothing in the world, doesn't matter. If you're around your weak brethren who might be scandalized by you eating meat sacrificed to idols, then don't do it. But otherwise, that it doesn't really affect anything. And so because Paul was lenient on those two things that
Okay.
were characterized as sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed to idols, maybe whoever is writing the book of Revelation is like, you Pauline bastards, you're corrupting the youth. Um, so there's a case to make that
So the
maybe,
connection is just old man yells at cloud. That's
yeah, basically, yeah.
it.
Which is what Revelation is about. It's a weird fantasy, revenge fantasy, where God is going to come down and do all kinds of naughty things.
And
And
has
there's an
nothing
argument
to
to make.
do with what's going on today.
Yeah, not, and there's even sexual violence. This revenge fantasy includes some sexual violence as well. So uh, that questionable morals
Yep.
sometimes.
We got another Seinfeld question here. So,
Okay.
what's the deal with Ruth and feet? Why is everyone so obsessed with covering and uncovering feet and exchanging sandals? It is a bit odd because the word for, legs and feet in Hebrew is the same, regalim is the same.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
is this really a metaphor for fertility? What the heck is a plony almoni?
The Plony Almoni. I'm not. I have a friend back in the blogging days of the late aughts who went by, his username was Plony Almoni.
That's
Um,
great.
and I had another friend whose username was LXX Luther, which I thought was awesome. But so yeah, regal foot, wriggling feet is frequently used as a euphemism for the genitals. And so and for other things like to cover one's feet is to drop trow so that you can defecate basically.
Hmm.
And but elsewhere, uncovering the feet is a euphemism for also dropping trow, but for other reasons. And
Hmm.
so what Naomi says is, yeah, go in there and uncover his feet and lay by him. And in my opinion, what's going on here is Naomi's like, all right, here's how we're gonna snare him. You're gonna snare yourself a man, because if he's drunk and sleeps with you, then he's kind of obligated to seal the deal. And that seems to be where the story goes. But then Boaz is like, take it easy. We can do this legit. This can be all be above board. And I think like the text is it's kind of between the lines. Whether or not there was actual intercourse that took place that evening, I don't know that the text is clear on that. But the language does seem to be pregnant with significance, to be rather crude about it.
Hmm. That's what we do here, crude puns.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So we have a few questions left. So can you talk a bit about the lineage of kings from the Babyloniaca, the Berosus, versus
Oh,
the line of kings in Genesis who lived to be over 900 years old? Is the one in Genesis just a copy of the line of Sumerian kings?
it's not a copy directly from the Sumerian king list, but it's in that tradition. By the time you get down to the Babylonian exile, the king lists have been, rewritten, and the ones that are in circulation in the middle of the first millennium BCE, the kings are not reigning for 30,000 years or 11,000 years. It's more like 1,000 years, 700 years. And so, yeah, the old ages in excuse me, the old ages of the patriarchs are, yeah, they're just riffing on that, where their royalty in Mesopotamia, they're not so big on whoever's in charge of writing or editing Genesis, probably not as big a fan of kings. There's the Bible is of two minds about that, but probably representing the patriarchs in that vein. Think of the patriarchs as the royalty of our golden age, and so they're living for these really really long time periods. And yeah, most scholars would say this is definitely riffing on the king lists as they were in circulation in the 6th and the 5th centuries BCE in Babylon. I think Berossus comes later than that, doesn't he? Let me, or is it
I
do
can't
do
remember
do
the
do
exact
do
year.
do yeah, I don't remember when he lived. Early third century. Yeah, I thought it was Hellenistic. Early third century BCE. So that is probably a come in later than when the king lists were written, and so the king lists are probably a little bit different um, by that time period. Excuse me. Sorry, I did not get a lot of sleep last night. That is not your fault. That is my fault.
That's
So,
fine. We understand. I mean, talking about the Bible is so boring. So, who are the pagans of Haran? What connection is there between Haran and Abraham? Was the Maimonides translated book, The Nabatean Agriculture, accurate about the Sabians of Haran?
by the time of Maimonides, whatever tradition is in circulation was almost certainly not accurate. I don't think that Maimonides has access to any kind of preserved accurate stuff. And again, I think this is coming from well over 1,000 years after the setting of these events. So I don't think that there's much accurate going on. I think this is probably the way that these authors are representing what's going on in this time period. If you're writing about, you know, you need to come up with villains, and they're from a time period that's 1,500 years prior to when you're writing, and nobody's feelings are going to be hurt by this when you're writing, you're going to say whatever feels good. So yeah, I can't imagine that there's much going on that is historical, and even less so when you get into the pseudepigraphic texts associated with Abraham,
Mhm.
where he's like laughing at his dad's idols and like burning down his dad's barn and all this kind of stuff. Like that's all stuff that people are creating in their minds. But certainly Haran was a place where there were a variety of different deities worshipped. I think the moon deity, whether it was Sin or somebody else, probably would have been a big one there. But there would have been, excuse me, again, a variety of them. So
Speaking of other
yeah,
deities, who is
yeah.
Beelzebub? How did a Philistine god become a demon and then get associated with Satan?
Such a cool story. And I think I talk about it in the book. Yeah, I talk about it a little bit in the book. So Beelzebub is an editorialized name. The real name would have been Baal-zebul,
Hmm.
which is what we actually have in the New Testament. So most translations render Beelzebub, but the Greek very clearly is Baal-zebul. And that means Baal prince
Hmm.
in ancient Semitic languages. And we even have in the Ugaritic literature a reference to this figure, only it's backwards. It's Zevul Baal, Prince Baal. And so this is just a reference to a manifestation of Baal, the Northwest Semitic storm deity, who was demonized because this was the counterpart to Adonai, who is represented, excuse me again, is represented as a storm deity. In Psalm 18, you got the marching forth the low, heavy clouds and thunder and lightning. Psalm 29, same idea. In fact, Psalm 29 was probably just ripped off from a hymn to Baal, because the locations that are named are all much further north than Israel. They're in Baal's territory, and they just scribbled out Baal and wrote in Adonai. But as the direct competitor, the counterpart to Adonai, that's Adonai's main villain, main enemy. And so the name gets twisted around to Baal-zebub, Lord of Flies, or Ball of Flies,
Hmm.
and becomes demonized once we get into the Hellenistic period. And I don't think it's in Enoch, but by the time of the New Testament, they are one of their Satan becomes kind of the grab bag of evil
Hmm.
profiles. And so Leviathan is Satan. You get the serpent from the Garden of Eden
Oh
becomes
yeah.
Satan after the Bible. You get everybody is Satan, and it's like Bobby Boucher's mom. Everything's the devil to you, mama. Um, and just like Jesus is kind of the grab bag of all the messianic figures and
Right.
all that, Satan becomes the grab bag of all the evil figures. And Beelzebub is just one of those that was the main competitor of Adonai in the earlier periods, and so becomes demonized. And you even have one of Saul's sons is named Eshbal, which
Hmm.
means man of Baal. And so the editors were like, "We're not having that." And it becomes Ishboshet, which means
Oh
man
yes.
of shame,
Hmm.
because Baal is, and it's just a title that means Lord, and it was probably used as a title for Adonai. But then once it becomes more salient as the name of the bad deity, then you're not allowed to use that name.
Hmm.
Thus, Hosea, you will no more call me Baali, but call
Uh,
me Ishi.
we have a few more questions left. So, in the Testament of
Yeah.
Solomon, in which Solomon describes how he fell in love with the Shumanite woman and agreed to worship Memphin and Moloch, is Moloch a god though, in exchange for sex, who are or what is Remphan and Moloch?
So yeah, Moloch is not a deity,
No.
uh, and I go over that in the book.
Hmm.
And so, if somebody is attributing deity to Moloch, if somebody's using it as a divine name, that's clearly a post-biblical tradition, or at least a post-Hebrew Bible tradition. I think because it wasn't even there by the time of the translation of the Septuagint. But yeah, Remphan, is that? Excuse me. Ooh, that's in the book of Acts, and I think that is a an alteration of a reference to a uh, a borrowing from Akkadian, and it wasn't Remphan. It's like Helion or something. No, no, no. That's Ruth's husband. Shoot, I remember. I forget what the Hebrew
Yeah, I
word is.
don't
It's in
remember.
Ezekiel, isn't it? It's in. I think it's in Ezekiel.
Maybe. But I
But then
but
in Acts it gets picked up, and basically originally in whatever Hebrew Bible passage it was in, it was just talking about a deity that was associated with a constellation or a planet that was worshipped in Mesopotamia. But then it gets kind of twisted around, and and it becomes this reference to Remphan, and then you get the Star of Remphan, which is supposed to be the, for the anti-Semites, that's the Star of David,
oh,
or
is
for the
it? Oh, that's interesting. That I
yeah,
never heard.
oh yeah, yeah, that's
Hmm.
a really annoying one. That the Star of Remphan is the Star of David.
I learn new things every day on your channel.
And then the other one is that it is a reference to the hexagram that is like at the pole of the planet Saturn. Like
Oh,
it has
is
this
this the
little,
thing where they say that God is really like Jupiter or something like that? Is
yeah,
that this
something like that.
conspiracy? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Saturn worship or something like that, because you can draw a star in the hexagon that is,
Well, I've seen them do some sort of number thing as well, where they anyway,
yeah,
yes, the whole thing of like it's actually the worship of Jupiter. And I just
it's
went,
a
wow, that is
mess.
such a stretch. I don't know how you got that, but you know what? I'm impressed that you went that far. That's all I have to say.
It is awe inspiring, just how ridiculous it can get.
The tinfoil hat syndrome is really both depressing and very interesting. Um,
Agreed.
okay, so next question. What is the Book of Tobit? Who is Asmodai? Why does Solomon call upon him so much?
So you get a lot of later traditions that are developing where, again, it's fan fiction or anti-fan fiction, where they're trying to turn the, you have this idea in the Hebrew Bible that Solomon worshiped these the gods of all his wives and all that. It's just kind
Hmm.
of a passing reference, and so you got to explore that. You got to explore that, and so you're making up all these deities, and then you get the Lesser Key of Solomon,
Hmm.
and you get the grimoires, and you get all this stuff that's all supposed to be based on Solomon, and it's all fan fiction. Um,
Early medieval fan fiction. The
yeah,
key,
yeah,
like the Goetia and the Lesser Key of Solomon. Yeah. It's
yeah.
fun though. I love all the drawings of the demons. They're so exciting. Like some of them have bird heads and giant chicken feet. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, the demons take all kinds of different shapes, which is fun, and they so frequently are associated with animals. For some reason,
Hmm.
demons are like, we're going to do animals this time. And yeah, and then the Book of Tobit is a apocryphal text, which is talking about Tobias's journey. I think they're in Nineveh and Ecbatana, which would be up in, is that Persia or is that Anatolia? I thought that was, I don't remember, wherever Ecbatana is. And then you have Tobit's Song of Praise, and yeah, I don't remember. I don't think there was a single like unified narrative. It's kind of talking about a few different things, but it's an apocryphal text that was very popular in early Judaism as well as early Christianity. And a lot of people have said none of the Apocrypha was written in Hebrew, but we have fragments of Tobit, at least in Aramaic, from
Hmm.
the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. So it doesn't seem to have been originally composed in Greek. And Tobit was considered canonical by the earliest Christians and for many centuries, until, yeah, you had those darn reformers who
Dang reformers reforming
wanted to.
everything. Is the mark of the beast just a copy of the story of Cain and Abel? Why is it the number 666 and not 616?
Well, because they knew that Marvel would name a universe 616, and so they didn't want to steal that intellectual property.
He
But
says as he's wearing a Daredevil shirt.
well, no, not
Oh, is
Daredevil.
it not the, is that the, oh, no, it's not, it's a Spidey shirt.
Yep, Miles Morales. Um, yeah, the no, I don't think the Mark of the Beast just comes from Cain. I think that it is the main villain of the Book of Revelation is the Roman Empire and all the bad that they're doing. And I think 666 is probably supposed to kind of refer generically to them, but if there is a person behind it, Nero would probably be our best guess because Nero fits both 666 and 616 based on which language you're going from,
Hmm.
because you have coinage, and this also fits in with the Mark of the Beast discussion. Coinage showing Nero's face, which would be the image of Nero, and then has his name Emperor Nero or Kaiser Nero in Greek or Latin. And if you translate from Greek into Hebrew and then get the numerical values, it's Neron Kaiser with an N on the end of the name Nero, and that adds 50, and that gives us 666. But if you go from Latin, there's no N on the end, it's just Nero Kaiser. And you go into Hebrew, you add it all up, you get 616. So one of our earliest manuscripts that preserves the number of the beast from Revelation chapter 13 is has 616. And scholars say, well, maybe this manuscript came from an area where people were a little more active in Latin, and so
Hmm.
maybe that made more sense to them. And there was a book that recently came out that argued that the Nero Redivivus myth probably didn't start up until after the Book of Revelation was written, and so they try to make the case that it probably wasn't specifically Nero that is in view. Um, I don't know if that will catch on, but whether it's kind of just Roman general or specifically Nero as kind of the avatar for the Roman Empire, um, it's definitely not anything that happened after the first century CE. It's definitely not any kind of technology that's going on today. It's definitely not UPC codes. It's definitely not
It's not
an Amazon
5G.
One payment. Yeah, it's not. Oh
It's
gosh,
not
not five.
QR code.
Yeah.
With apologies to Iron Maiden.
It's not the address of one of the UN buildings in New York or something like
Oh
that.
God. Oh God.
Yeah, it's everybody
It's so,
wants to have an enemy.
it's
This,
so
this is what
funny. Hmm.
I don't remember if I make this point in the book, but one of the things that I find so annoying about people who want to leverage Revelation is the book of Revelation is supposed to be this revenge fantasy on the
Hmm.
part of an oppressed small minority group who is under the boot of an oppressive giant empire. And everybody wants to read themselves into Revelation, which means they have to find themselves as the victims of some kind of oppressive regime. And so you have to go out and find a victim. But guess who the empire is now? The United States is the empire now. Christianity is the empire.
But the end
And
times are coming. The end times are
and
coming. And the US is going to bring it about, and we'll all be happy once
oh,
everybody's, yeah, I know. That's
but
how it
if
is.
you got to find somebody to be oppressing you. And so who do they identify as
But
the oppressors?
don't you know that everybody is oppressing the Christian nationalists? Don't you
Yeah,
know, Dan?
but it's all the victims of Christian oppression that they're identifying as the perpetrators. And so like trans people, ooh, they're demonic, they're coming after us, they're destroying the family. No, you're driving trans kids to take their own lives and to live
Yeah, but they don't
lives
see
filled
it
with
that way.
depression. And of course they don't see it that way because they want to find themselves in the book of Revelation. And that's one of the things that drives me up the wall
I told
with.
Dan last time he was here that, I didn't know a lot of this. I grew up in a very different tradition. I learned the Bible in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic. And so when I was about 25 and I started learning about, oh, people thinking that the snake is Satan and about I never read the book of, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what the rapture was. And so when I got out and saw all of these kinds of dogmas, to use your phrase, pervading this, I just went, did they read the same book that I read? I don't know what's happening here. This is
Yeah.
weird. Um,
Well, and this is a lot of people want to read the Hebrew Bible in English translation, and then so you get one like the NRSV, which I usually recommend as the best one. But like if you read the Jewish Study Bible, a lot of it is translated very differently, precisely because it's not being read through a Christocentric lens.
mhm.
When you get to he will be called Counselor, Prince of Peace, the Almighty, the God, all that kind of stuff. Like it's translated very differently because they're not looking forward to. They're not translating it through the lens of the New Testament, and
Right,
I
exactly.
I don't think a lot of people understand just how differently it reads when you are not presupposing
Yeah, the story
Christianity.
I told Dad the last time was I have a friend who grew up in a very Christian nationalist household. She obviously is not there anymore, but she said to me something about abortion, which you talk a lot about in your book. And I said, "Well, what do you mean? It's not in the Old Testament." And she just turned around and she goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, that phrase that you just said is not it's not the Old Testament." And I said, "Go on." Like I gave her the passage. So here, go ahead. You go home, you read it, and then you call me and tell me what you think. And so she went home. 5 hours later, she picks up the photo. She goes, "They lied to me, Michelle." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, but you should have looked at it before they told you that you were evil." I don't know what to tell you. It really is just a matter of people reading things with an objective lens and without that back translation of knowing what's coming that really changes the narrative.
Yeah, and that's a point I make on the very first page of my book is that if we're not willing to let the Bible be and say anything other than what we already presuppose, what we already believe, then we're not allowing it to operate on its own terms. If it is only allowed to say what we already believe, then one is not going to change us. It's
No,
not going to
it's
make us better people. We're just going to use it as authorization for our beliefs, and yeah, that's when it becomes a rhetorical bludgeon, and when it becomes incredibly harmful.
yep. Last two questions. Who
Okay,
who is Avimelech? I think English is Abimelech, I guess.
Abimelech is usually how it. Yeah.
So who
Um,
who who is Abimelech? Was he really king of Israel or just Shechem? Why is he in Judges if he is a king? Why is his rulership disputed? Wasn't Saul considered to be the first king of Israel?
uh, so
Just gonna clip that.
so the book of Judges is gathering a bunch of different traditions together from the pre monarchic period,
Mm,
and it's being edited in certain ways. The Deuteronomistic historian there's a good shellacking of Deuteronomistic ideology as well. So it's a lot of older stories being pressed into the service of much later kings and rulers and elite scribal classes and things like that. Um, so he's the son of Gideon, I think in Judges, and is at Shechem. I think, and yeah, whether he's a king or a judge, I don't recall off the top of my head. However, I do know there are some scholars who think that is this Judges 9? Is he in Judges 9?
I don't remember. I just know that he is there. It's
Yeah,
been so
okay.
long since I've actually sat and looked at it.
Um, yeah, yeah. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem and commune with them. Blah 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 blah. So there's a theory that there are some places in Judges, and Judges 9 is one of them, where the traditions may preserve an early memory of a kind of confederation of tribes that might have been the earliest kind of proto Israel, where the concept of Israel may have started off as maybe a seasonal or temporary confederation whenever these groups that lived in the central or northern hill country were under attack from the Philistines or from outside groups. Maybe they confederated and they said, the flag we're going to fly while we're confederated is Israel, because it means El contends. So El is going to contend for us against these outsiders. And maybe some of this memory is preserved in Judges, and so perhaps Abimelech was one of the early leaders of this group of confederated
Mhm.
tribes who identified as Israel. That's one theory, but I don't know for sure. I don't even remember exactly how the story goes in Judges 9, but yeah, certainly the narrative that we have of cute little Saul and then David and Solomon and then Jeroboam and Rehoboam and then like that is all a much later literary creation and propagandistic ideological creation. So yeah, certainly Abimelech plays into the ancient past somehow, but I don't remember exactly how.
Last question.
Okay.
What is the Didache? When was it written, and was it almost part of the Bible?
I don't know if it was almost part of the Bible. It certainly was very influential. It means like the teaching or the doctrine. And it is a text that kind of says, here's how Christians live, here's what Christians need to do. So it was an early kind of guidebook for followers of Jesus, probably written at the very end of the first century or the very beginning of the second century CE. And it was highly influential, but I'm not aware of it ever really being considered canonical. Like we have some texts like the Shepherd of Hermas or the Epistle of
Hmm.
Barnabas
Hmm.
that are included in some manuscripts of the Bible. I don't know that the Didache was ever included in one of those manuscripts, but it was certainly a very influential early Christian text. But yeah, it's basically kind of a I don't know if I would say a Proverbs version within early Christianity, but something like that, saying this, this is the rule book for Christians or something like that.
Well, if you want to find out more, you're going to have to buy Dan's book, which I know you all will. Dan, I don't even have to wish you luck because I already know the book is definitely going to sell. And I have my special copy pre-ordered and I'm definitely going to
Oh,
get
awesome.
the audiobook. April 29th, it will be
Mm-hmm.
out. And with St. Martin's Press, pre-orders are still up. Please order that.
Yeah. And
And
also, I'm going to be going out on tour with my podcast co-hosts to places
Dan
like
Beecher, Dan
Dan
Squared,
Beecher. Yep.
greatest glasses in the business.
he
Uh,
does a he does a really good job with those
I,
glasses.
I listen to Dad Over Dogma every week, but I sometimes also watch one to see what t-shirt you're wearing, and two just to see Dan's flash eyewear. That's what well, I have to ask him. I hope one day he'll come on our show and we can have a talk together because I have to ask him where he gets all his glasses because they're so good. Some of them are stunning, like they're
Yeah.
designer pieces, and
Hmm.
I hope people tell him that. I hope for your book tour, he's got like a whole like every day, he's got a whole like set like this is a Sunday, this is a Monday.
I don't know if he's going to plan out the wardrobe that meticulously, but I think he probably has enough glasses to make it work. Which
And
is,
but the real question is, do you have a t-shirt that matches your book that says the Bible says so on it?
oh no, I should reach out to the publisher, and
Oh,
that would be fun.
I'd
I'll
love for it to have that and then your own artwork on it because we know that you do draw. You've shown some of your pieces off, which is really amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. I would be that would be really cool to design something. I'll have to talk with my publisher because technically I think the cover is their intellectual property and they
Oh,
might,
it's designed by
but if
someone,
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, that's a good idea. I had not thought of that, but that would be fun to have for the tour. In
You do have
addition to
another
the
shirt.
other things.
You have God and God's wife. You have that
Yes,
shirt. Yeah.
I have three of those actually. And two of them are my own design, and then one was one that somebody just sent me, which is what inspired me
I
to
marked it
make my own
off
design.
so people can, if people are watching, they can see. This is so here's God with his amazing penis, and there's Ashera. There she is. There's God's wife.
Yeah, I think I describe I just describe the drawing as showing God as prominently male or something like that. But yeah, we're if anybody is interested in getting a book signed or picking up a copy of the book and getting it signed or something like that, we're going to be stopping in Chicago, in Seattle, in Portland, in LA, in Dallas, in Atlanta, in Philly, and in DC, starting April 26th and going through to May 22nd, I think is
You're
the
welcome to
last one.
Canada. Despite what
I
the news says, you're more than welcome to come here. We will definitely give you a big welcome.
I've had a bunch of people request that I come up to Canada, and the
We might have
that
no
will have to be
bookstores left
something
by the
different.
time you get here, but
Well, and I don't the crossing there. I used to live in Bellingham, just south of the border,
mhm.
just south of BC, and because I did one of my master's degrees in Canada, and so I've been across this crossing hundreds of times. And I was just there in December with my daughter when I took her to the last show of the Eras tour, uh,
Uh,
which was which was a blast, and we had a lot of fun. And it was and it was a great experience for her as well. Like we had Taylor Swift's bassist recognize me in a cafe and come and
whoa,
stop me on the
amazing.
way out the door, and like Joel McHale gave us the hotel room that we were staying in because there were no rooms anywhere in Vancouver. But we missed our flight because of trying to get back across the border into the U.S., which I think right now is probably going to
So
be even
that's a
more
sign that
difficult to
you should
do.
have stayed.
I would have loved to have stayed, but I she had to be at school the next day,
Oh, dang it.
and I had to work. But the fun thing about my job is I can work virtually anywhere. The quality of the recording might not be the same,
Hey, we
but
have
yeah.
decent internet. It's not that bad.
Well, no, I just mean the camera quality, because I got to record on the front
Yeah.
facing camera instead of the
But
other.
I like this era for you, this Dark Dan era that you've now made and you now have the streamer set up with the fancy
Well,
lights and the pretty background.
somebody was like, "Oh no, you're becoming a Twitch streamer," because I
When you get the neon lights, then I'll be worried.
well, I'm kind of transitioning home base from TikTok to YouTube
Yeah.
because TikTok does not seem to belong for this nation. And so part of that means now I record in the landscape,
Hmm.
and I've got to, set myself apart from the background. So I was like, ugh, get some lights and figure out how to do this. And so this is just my kind of quick and dirty set myself apart from my background in my office. So
Well, I hope the Dark Dan era continues.
it will for the foreseeable future.
And I hope we get a second volume of this, despite what the next book that you want to write, because I know you've probably got 10 more in you. But I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. And I'm sure millions of people are already telling you. So, and you have was it your PhD? Dr. Francesca's here. She's the
Yeah.
first one. I saw. I was so excited.
Is she on the very front?
She's on the
Yep, they're at the top. Yeah.
very
So
first at the top.
so this particular printing is for publicity, and so it includes the blurbs and everything on the front and the back. And yeah, she enjoyed the book very much. She says she's going to assign it to students
And it
in
should be, absolutely.
classes.
I do
Yeah.
think
So
so. I wish when I was in theology, I wish I had had a book like this. Just because it is accessible. And I think even though, textbooks are important, and yes, we need them, and academic texts are important. And yes, I would say that this is a pop academic text, really. We do need them. But when you're talking to people who have no idea about this subject, I grew up with this, Dan did not. He learned it. Look, you got into it much later, but this was forced on me as a child. And if I had had something like this as a kid, I think this
mhm.
is very accessible for all ages, really. Maybe not the Gen X jokes, but they'll just skip over those. And I think that
Who's Rob Zombie?
it's fine. It's fine. He's still alive. It's
Yeah,
okay. They
yeah.
they could look it up on the internet. They have that
Yeah,
now. They
yeah,
have that.
yeah.
But having a book like this with the humor and with the accessibility, I think is really important. And so even if, let's say, TikTok does go away, you still, at least people still have this and they can still access you on other social medias, on YouTube, and write their tinfoil comments to you.
Yeah, well,
But
thank you so much for the very kind words. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that all comes through in the book because it's precisely what I wanted this to be, a kind of
maybe I should say
reference.
it doesn't, so you'll just do another one.
Well, I'm not just yeah, I'm definitely hoping to do a volume 2 at some point because there's a lot left unsaid that is
The
claimed to
Bible
have
is
been
very
said.
big.
So,
Bible
yeah,
is very big. And as you're very clear in the beginning of the book, Bible doesn't mean anything.
yeah,
Unless what you ascribe to it. It is a very interesting and it's a fascinating book and it's a very interesting narrative. And it doesn't
yeah.
mean anything until you want it to mean something. But this book is
Exactly.
meaningful, and I hope it helps
Thank you.
people who maybe are a little bit shy of going on TikTok to encourage to engage more in the study of the Bible and misinformation about the same. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for being here, Dan. I hope you come back again. When you're, I mean, you're
Absolutely.
you're you're already in with Taylor Swift. You're too popular for this program now. That's it. Everybody knows you now. But more importantly, the fit for this video was Berserk chapter 315. And Dan, your shirt for this video was?
This was Miles Morales.